Past Politics 101A, A History in Symbols. The popularity of Julius Caesar prevented the senators who later killed him from being able to resist first proclaiming him imperator for life. The popularity of Caesar's reforms to debt laws had made most Roman citizens very wealthy, and those who had carried Caesar's face on lead-lined coins when he came to power were carrying around gold coins when he was murdered by a conspiracy of jealous, old-money senators. Brutus, the one to deliver the death blow, was himself an optimata opposed to the first triumvirate of Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. But the concept of the triumvirate did not die with Octavius, Julius Caesar's adopted nephew, following his dissolution of the second triumvirate, consisting of himself, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. Because those who supported the assassination of Caesar saw the time between the end of his first triumvirate and the beginning of the second triumvirate formed by Caesar Octavian as pierced through the midpoint by their successful conspiracy to murder him. Those who supported and continued to support the assassination of anyone who would become ruler of the whole world saw their deed as an omen of future events yet to come. By the time of the murder of Jesus, called the Christ, by the Jerusalem Sanhedrin, via the permission of Roman Procurator Pontius Pilate, which followed the turn of the millennium and the aeon by nearly the same duration afterwards, as did nominal years 1 occur following the event of Caesar's assassination, those who conspired to kill any potential kings of the world who could attempt to arise had already adopted the triumvirate model as their own and formed a group dedicated to ruling the world. To make the political figure of Jesus into an example to any and all future would-be teachers of self-sovereignty who refused to bow before the Caesar over all the world, the group of conspirators who had plotted out the political impact of Julius Caesar's murder and who had seen the religious implications of the murder of Jesus Christ fulfilled, this group has systematically twisted and perverted the words of the historical person of Jesus by marginalizing his message beside the story of his murder as the basic premise for the faith of Christianity. Thus, the original symbol of the earliest followers of Jesus after the crucifixion, the Ichthus, or Greek symbol of Pisces, the geometrically vesica-shaped fish logo, had to be supplanted with and replaced by a symbol determined by his killers themselves. However, they knew that, because they could not symbolize the message of their own faith to early Christians with the gruesome abuse and grisly slaughter of their ritual sacrifice of the Lamb of Peace by the traditional emblem of the crucifix itself, bedecked by the bloodied body of their Savior, it thus fell to the Roman Emperor Constantine, in his role as high priest of the Roman Flamines, colleges built around temples to the 7 Olympic gods of Rome, to choose a symbol for the new religion that was seeking his approval to be accepted as a new school of Roman religion, the Christian Church in Rome. This branch of early Christianity, founded by Peter, one of the 12 apostles of Christ, and called Catholic or Universal Christianity, appealed to Emperor Constantine by offering him and all subsequent Caesars of Rome the title of Pope, meaning Father, in the Roman Catholic Christian Church. His suggestion was the Chi Rho, formed as a logogram by combining 2 Greek letters, Chi as K and Rho as R, which he had supposedly seen in a vision on the battlefield. Its meaning, he proposed, was, "In this sign you shall conquer," pronounced in Latin as "in hoc signo vinces." Constantine's vision never became the official symbol of the Christian religion. However, by subsequent pressure exerted on the churches centered in other regions, eventually the Catholic denomination came to dominate the doctrines and dogma of the entire faith of Christendom. As such, Caesar, called only Pope, following the final sacking of Rome by the Goths and Arabs from 410 to 846 AD, continued to reign as the Emperor of Christendom, the religious kingdom of all Christians, even after the dissolution of the official Roman Empire. By supplanting the pantheist religions of Rome with monotheist Christianity, the conspiracy of king killers effectively replaced the symbol of Jesus with the symbol of the cross as the dominant symbol of Christianity. The cross symbol signifies death, as opposed to the fish emblem signifying life, and as such is a motif used by the inheritors of the conspiracy to kill Caesar ever since to signify their own empowerment over the minds of all Christians. However, the lessons taught by the words of Jesus himself remain incomprehensible to the mindsets of those who, to this day, control the world's largest single monotheist religious empire. The Pope, today, is merely a figurehead serving the whims and dictates of a group that lurks behind the cloth, in the shadow of death in the dark night of the soul, beneath the foot of the cross. The Triumvirate assassins had replaced the office of Caesar with officers loyal only to them, and the title of Caesar had been replaced by the title of Pope by the beginning of the Dark Ages, when the Pope ruled from Rome over the kings and their vassals in Europe, and where the kings taxed and the vassals owned the serfs who were the European peoples originally conquered by Caesar and converted to citizens of Rome. The symbol used by the earliest Christians to signify their loyalty to the message of Jesus was replaced by the symbol of the cross, used to signify the state authority that had crucified Jesus over the rights of his followers, the early Christians. Likewise, the logogram of Constantine, the Chi-Rho or Constantine Cross, was replaced by the cross autograph of Charlemagne, the first ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, considered the King of Europe, answerable as second only to the Pope of Roman Christendom. By the lifetime of Charles the Bald, the grandson of Charlemagne, the cross had become completely dominant as the symbol of power in all Christendom. Here we see the shield of Charles the Bald, showing a red cross on a white field, symbolizing the blood of the innocent, with a golden crown at the crux, signifying Christ as the King over all Christians. Despite the Roman Catholic Pope having gained the loyalty of the Holy Roman Emperors of Europe, Christendom had been divided into the Western Roman Catholic Empire and the Orthodox Church of Greece, which ruled Eastern Christendom from Constantinople. When Constantinople was threatened by Ottoman Turks in the late 11th century, the Pope launched the Crusades, sending countless noblemen and serfs to die in a vain attempt to crush the Muslim Arab natives of the Holy Land and replace their population with Christian Europeans. The noblemen and serfs sent into the Holy Lands on the First Crusade retook Jerusalem and established themselves as the order of knights called the Hospitallers. The Hospitaller knights' patrons were doctors. However, by the time of the plagues in Europe, the Church stopped being the primary care provider of medicine to the people of Europe, and the military order of knights had split into two trends, one the military order itself, and the other the practice of medicine. The symbol for doctors of medicine nowadays is commonly familiar as the caduceus, or snake wrapped around a staff, symbolizing Asclepius, son of Hermes, and founder of modern medicine according to legends of the Greek Golden Age. The codices staff of Asclepius is shown in modern symbols of medicine as upon a blue Constantine Cross. The presence of the Constantine Cross symbol at the period in time when the Hospitaller Knights were becoming the association of independent doctors practicing medicine across Europe alarmed the conspirators whose figurehead was the Roman Catholic Pope. However, what alarmed them more than the presence of the Constantine Cross in the symbol of the unaffiliated practice of medicine was the presence of the codices. This was a symbol new to their control system because it came from somewhere outside of it. It symbolized the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the form of the crucified serpent, the creature who sheds its skin to die and be reborn again. The triumvirate of conspirators in power behind the scenes of the Catholic Church and European politics of the early Dark Ages were deeply concerned by the Hospitaller Knights, concepts being brought back from the Muslim, Hebrew, and Gnostic Holy Land into Christian Europe by the returning soldiers of the Crusades. Ideas such as private ownership of medical practices were not to their liking. So, in the late 12th century AD, these conspirators sent the Knights Templar, adjunct to the Priory of Zion, to investigate the origins for the knowledge of Asclepius's codices brought back by the Hospitallers. The Knights Templar were successful in learning the Gnostic origins of the Hospitallers' beliefs, and transmitted their findings to the Pope, who then had the order forcibly expunged in the Albigensian heresy at the beginning of the Inquisition, meant to purge Europe of heretical and anti-Christian pagan beliefs such as Gnosticism. The Knights Templar were sent to the occupied Holy Land to seek the origin for the Asclepian influence of the Christian Hospitaller Knights. The Constantine Cross of the modern medical practice symbol was considered to have implied their knowledge of the true holders of power in Christendom at that time, and to imply the shift in trend from seeing the Pope as Emperor of Christendom towards seeing the Pope as merely the contemporary continuation of Caesar over Rome. The Templars traced the origin of influence on the Hospitallers' symbolism of the codices staff of Asclepius to the faith of Christian Gnosticism in the Holy Land. Christian Gnostics in the Holy Land appeared to have preserved the apocrypha and pseudepigraphal writings of Egyptian Copts and Hebrew Essenes from contemporary to the life of Jesus, without being influenced to adopt the Septuagint Gospels of the Latin Vulgate imposed in European Christendom since the era of Constantine. The Gnostics considered the Christ worshipped by Catholicism a degeneration of symbolism signifying the influence of the demiurge, the Gnostic equivalent to the concept of Satan. Thus, the serpent symbolized Christ as Satan. For their loyal learning of the Gnostic beliefs for the Pope in turn dissolved the Knights Templar order, divested them of their property, rewarding it in turn to the remaining Hospitallers to remilitarize them as the Knights of Malta, and burn the remaining Templars as heretics. So began the Catholic Inquisition against Satanism and pagan witchcraft in Europe. The Knights Hospitallers were combined with the Knights Templar into the Knights of Malta. The Knights of Malta are still around now, at the turn of the 21st century. They remain an order strictly loyal to the Catholic papacy, though they admit Protestant members as well, and have a permanent member status at the UN. The Knights of Malta were allowed to survive only because they remained loyal to the Pope, who, in turn, answered to the triumvirate of conspirators who really held power. This triumvirate exercised the Inquisition in order to purge the last pagan faiths from organized practice in Europe. However, they could not prevent the loss of medical practice to the private sector, due to a shift in economic management that occurred as a result of the European plague, the Black Death, toward the end of the Inquisition. So what the conspirators wanted was to examine the Asclepian tradition's original method of influence on the minds of returning crusaders who had been exposed to Christian Gnosticism while on tour of duty in the Holy Land. They had preserved the military order of the Hospitallers, but had largely lost the practice of medicine to the private sector, and they wanted to know exactly how the Asclepian tradition had caused this. Knowing that Hermes was the father of Asclepius, and having learned from the Inquisition that the cult of alchemists worshipped Hermes Trismegistus, the conspirators wanted to know exactly how the Greek cult of Hermes had influenced the European Gnostics via the Asclepian tradition's influence on the Hospitallers. They needed a European Gnostic to study the meaning of the codices staff of Hermes Trismegistus and to discern the meaning of its dual entwined serpents. To accomplish this goal, the conspirators remotely guided the developing interests of Englishman Dr. John Dee. Dee founded an order of Hermetic alchemists who studied the practical scientific applications of contemporary metallurgy toward creating a symbolic alphabet to interpret the pagan religion and translate it into Christian monotheism. The original results were the tarot cards resulting from Dee's study of the hieroglyphic monad, symbol of Hermes as the alchemical elementary metal mercury. But Dr. Dee himself was no fool. Living around the turn of the 17th century, he was well educated on the history of Christianity, and saw the cross of Constantine as alive and well in the minds and hearts of the modern papal Catholics of Rome. He disapproved of the Crusades and the Inquisition, and was among the Reformation-era Protestants of England who called themselves Anglican, and who were loyal to the King of England as the head of the Church of England, and who did not answer to the authority of the Catholic denomination of the Christian Church in Rome under the Pope. Dr. Dee also studied the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha of the Middle Eastern religions, and came to the conclusion that Roman Catholicism had indeed been used to marginalize the moral importance of the words of Jesus himself. He believed it was the substance of these apocryphal teachings that was the cause of the split between the Hospitallers in Jerusalem into the independent schools of medicine run by his lifetime as state universities. As such, he quickly realized that the conspirators behind the Roman Catholic Pope of his day were the same who had conspired to assassinate Jesus under the state-authorized power of Rome, as well as those in the Roman Senate who had conspired to assassinate Julius Caesar. Knowing the assassin guild within Roman Catholic Christendom controlled the state authority of the Pope, Dee realized his knowledge of the Gnostic Apocrypha to the public in coded format to protect his own life. The conspirators themselves learned a great amount from the work of Dr. Dee. However, ultimately the greatest threat to their secret authority ever posed evolved from the cult of Hermes formed by Dr. Dee. Dr. Dee's Hermetic order formed the roots of European Rosicrucianism, an anti-papal faith underlying the Reformation era's radical changes to Christian religious doctrine and dogma, begun by Martin Luther, that swept across Europe following the Inquisition. The secret society of Hermetic anti-papists behind the Rosicrucian faith eventually evolved from the survivors of the Templar Purge and, during the Inquisition, had reorganized as the private trade unions and workers' guilds building the Gothic cathedrals of Europe, called stone masons. Dr. Dee's Hermetic order revealed the meaning of the codices of Hermes was the knowledge of double helix DNA by ancient Egyptian magician doctors, and this effectively reduced to rubble the significance to all intervening history of the Roman Catholic Empire of Christendom. Dr. Dee's order represented the final split between the original private practitioners of medicine begun during the First Crusade from the state authority of the Pope of Rome. By the time Dee's original Invisible College of Rosicrucians became the Royal Society for the Study of the Natural Sciences in England, the decline of the era of papal authority signified by the cross had begun. Eventually, the goal of this endeavor was to replace the Roman Catholic concept of Christianity with the Gnostic concept, which had a completely different mythology, cosmology, doctrine, and religious dogma than the Catholic faith invented by the Roman Christian Caesars. It was believed by the earliest Crusaders, the Hospitallers, the Knights Templars, Dr. Dee himself, the Rosicrucians, and the earliest craft guilds of speculative Masons, that the message of the original words of the historical person of Jesus revealed that he, himself, was a Gnostic. This concept of Jesus not being a Roman Catholic came at the same time as the discovery by Christopher Columbus of a European trade route to North America, and the result was the final overthrow of the symbol of the cross as a symbol for papal power over Europe. The Rosy Cross symbol of Dr. Dee's Rosicrucian faith Hermetic secret society reflected the resurrection of the meaning of Jesus as central to the symbolism and meaning of the Christian cross symbol, and embodied the serpent symbol in the fang-like saying that every rose has its thorn. Thus, the conspirators of the assassin triumvirate, who had held power for centuries through the papal authority over Christendom from Rome, were forced to face the moral lesson they refused to learn by sacrificing Jesus and marginalizing his words and their meaning. Dr. Dee's Rosicrucian Hermetic Secret Society of Speculative Masons became dedicated to overturning the authority of the Pope, just as the original triumvirate of assassins had dedicated themselves to the cause of overturning the authority of Caesar. Thus, the Rosicrucian religious faith begun by Dr. Dee's Hermetic Secret Society was contrary to the Catholic faith in the Pope of Rome as the supreme king of Christendom, however professed itself at the time to be an invisible college because it sought to avoid the sort of persecution suffered by the Templars. Because of this anti-papist stance, many old Templars and families of old Templar knights and their founding order, the Priory of Zion, were eager to form a real and working secret order to advocate the Rosicrucian religious faith. By targeting the domination over the faith of Christianity in the empire of Roman Christendom by the Pope, the Hermetic Templar Rosicrucians, who formed Freemasonry, were attempting to topple the authority behind the Pope of the conspiracy of assassins that had held sway since the original assassination of Julius Caesar. Dr. Dee's Hermetic Templar Rosicrucian Freemasons' answer to the secret conspirators' authority was to replace the religion of Roman Catholicism with the religion of Christian Gnosticism. Their goal was to replace the plain, empty cross as the dominant symbol of Christianity with a symbol that would signify also the importance of the person who was crucified on that cross, whom was the original founder of the religion, killed by the secret conspiracy to be persecuted for his Gnostic beliefs. Thus, the rose cross symbol shows the 5-petaled rose mounted at the center of a golden Christian cross, surrounded by 4 green thorns on a circular field of white. The 5-petaled rose was a symbol of man as having 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head. The green thorns symbolized the fangs of the serpent symbol of Gnosticism. The cross was of gold to signify the wealth of Rome, and the colors of the red rose and white circle repeated the original Templar symbolism of blood and innocence. Dr. D's original hieroglyphic monad symbol, signifying man as a symbol for alchemical elemental metal mercury, equivalent to Greek Hermes, showed simultaneously the image of a human as 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head, and of Christ with the head surmounted by a dual-horned crown, also signifying the contemporary mistranslation of rays from his head as horns of Moses. This made the cross emblem of the upper torso on Dr. D's hieroglyphic monad symbol secondary in significance to the symbol's meaning as Hermes Trismegistus, and thus effectively shifted the center of Christian symbolism from the cross toward the Hermetic Codice's serpent symbol of Gnosticism. Dr. D's esoteric order's answer to the papal loyalist Catholic Knights of Malta was to militarize into an efficient hierarchy the orders of remnant non-Maltese Knights, who would then spread the message as a secret society of the Gnostic faith of an anti-papist Rosicrucianism. The result of this was free and accepted Masonry, which practiced speculative philosophical sciences at the end of the Dark Ages and beginning of the Renaissance, and which formed all the great round-table think tank groups of the day who studied and practiced science and who would usher in the Age of Reason. The Age of Reason posed an immense threat to the power of the Assassins' conspiracy, and they found themselves facing what has since come to be called the crisis of democracy. They saw the power of their state authority symbolized by the Christian cross slipping away and being replaced by the Gnostic notions of self-government, sovereign liberty, and inalienable human rights endowed by a divine creator. These Gnostic concepts strongly influenced the original thinking of the founders of Freemasonry, who saw religion as a battlefield between the concept of the cross and the concept of the man upon it, or between the serpent and an unhatched egg. By the mid-18th century, Rosicrucian Freemasons had staged political revolutions in almost every nation in Europe and successfully replaced the royal rulers of these countries, who remained loyal to the Pope in Rome, with democracies formed of popularly elected public officials representative of the masses of the populace. Thus, around this time period, the goal of replacing the cross as a symbol of the religious authority of the Roman Catholic Pope with the serpent as a symbol of the personal sovereignty of each individual man became a battle between competing political ideologies as well. Eventually, these notions of Gnosticism became so entrenched in Rosicrucian Christianity that the concept of Roman papal authority became weakened and was in danger of being completely replaced by the ideals of the religion of Gnosticism. The serpent appears chopped into pieces in this warning sign from the era of the American Revolution, symbolizing the weakness of the British colonies in America, separated and implying their strength if united into a single political body. Later, following the successful revolution in the British colonies for American independence from British rule, the symbol of the snake appears again, resurrected, its cut-apart segments now recombined, emblazoned with a warning not to tempt the wrath of the powerful, unified United States of America. The original flag of the United States was sewn by Martha Washington, the wife of the first U.S. President George Washington, during the American Revolutionary War, and depicted the 13 British colonies in America as 13 white stars in a circle on a blue field in the upper left corner of a field crossed vertically by 13 stripes, 6 white symbolizing innocence, and 7 red symbolizing blood. The flag of the United States now is changed very little from its original design, having instead of 13 colonies, the current 50 U.S. states symbolized as white stars in the blue field in the upper left. The stripes still signify our national spirit of pride, and the stars still signify our national spirit of duty. The various revolutionary wars across Europe, but particularly the war for American independence from Britain, were costing the assassination conspirators more than merely their religious authority through the Pope being diminished in favor of states' rights to self-govern and seek as goals the ideals of democracy. The attitude of the Freemason Jacobin revolutionaries was costing the elite conspiracy money. Knowing they had to formulate a plan quickly to deal with killing off the serpent symbol of Gnosticism, the contemporary Triumvirate Conspiracy needed someone who could fill the role that Dr. John Dee had for religion, only instead for the field of politics. They needed someone who could create a new cult, one that they could control. They found their patsy in Dr. Adam Weishaupt, a Bavarian professor of canon law teaching in Ingolstadt. He had been raised a Jesuit, loyal to the Pope, but had been exposed to Gnostic idealism and become a typical pro-democracy liberal of the Age of Reason. The conspirators took his model of a secret society, called the Perfectibilists of Bavaria, and formed from it a new cult, designed to penetrate the Freemasons and expose their plans to the conspirators so that the conspirators could then control the Masons. This cult was cursorily expelled from Bavaria under the name Illuminati, and has served the will of the conspirators who control all world events from behind the scenes to pose a fake threat to their hegemony in the form of a so-called conspiracy to overthrow all governments and religions, first of Europe and later the whole world. By posing as the underdog cult themselves, the conspirators of the Assassins' Triumvirate cast popular suspicion on Masonic Jacobins and effectively reversed the trend they had begun toward liberal democratic revolutions against papal loyal monarchies. The goal of the Bavarian Illuminati was professed in a work called The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, to be the destruction of all states' national sovereignty, followed by the implementation of global rule by a single tyrant appointed by the conspirators themselves. The Illuminati of Bavaria next provided the contemporary Rosicrucian cults in the Freemasonic secret societies with a shocking new piece of historical evidence in the form of the Golden Dawn Cipher manuscripts. These Cipher manuscripts, apparently copies of originals made during the era of John Dee's first construction of the Hermetic Templar Rosicrucians into a secret society, imply the Golden Dawn rituals as the original rituals practiced by the first Freemasons. The Golden Dawn rituals were implemented into practice by a group of Hermetic Rosicrucian Templar Freemasons, and they retained their ties to their founders from Germany, who had provided the Cipher manuscripts, i.e. the contemporary Bavarian Illuminati of the Assassins' Triumvirate Conspiracy. The Triumvirate hoped, by infiltrating Masonry as the Illuminati to the very esoteric and occult-most depths of its secret society's hidden hierarchy. They could reform the goals of Freemasons from those of the pro-democracy liberal Jacobins to those loyal to the conspiracy's goals of a global hegemony under one king. Just as they had, one aeon before, subverted the message of the words of Jesus Christ until his person meant nothing more than their ritual sacrifice to the state authority of Rome, so now they hoped to remold the message of Masonry into one loyal to their own power. The Triumvirate conspirators knew they needed a new form of symbol, like the cross, to replace the symbolism of the serpent used by Gnostics. They knew they needed a modern version of Emperor Constantine to propose such a radical concept, and they knew they had a loyal group of Masonic occultists in the form of the Golden Dawn group. Beginning in the earliest years of the 20th century, the Triumvirate Conspiracy of Assassins replaced the symbol of the Rosicrucian faith based on Gnostic Christianity and Hermetic anti-papistry with a much more complex alphabet of symbols derived from alchemical tarot. The Golden Dawn worked with the so-called Enochian magic system of Dr. John Dee and created a new form of model for it. They modernized all the occult symbolism of the esoteric traditions and mystery schools. They popularized the practice of magic in the mainstream of the public media, and they generally opened the door for control of the occult network of remaining Jacobins by the secret conspirators. The conspirators had no intention of losing control over their empire, simply due to the threat to absolute papal monarchism by the crisis of democracy. While cultivating the Golden Dawn as an occult esoteric mystery school group, the conspirators were simultaneously building up the Bavarian Illuminati into a political organization. The Bavarian Illuminati founded its first American branch in the form of the Skull and Bones fraternity on the Yale College campus. At the same time as the Golden Dawn and Skull and Bones were being groomed into a cult religion and a political order for a new age, governed entirely by the conspiracy, a young mountaineer named Aleister Crowley came to the attention of the secret chiefs when he joined the Golden Dawn. Crowley would go on to reform the Golden Dawn cult into his own format for a hierarchy, adding the Ipsissimus degree for one person to rule the whole occult network, and infused his creation entirely with his own ideas for the religious doctrine of this new age, which he called the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO. The outer order of the OTO, Crowley's concept for the New Age hierarchy of the complete occult network, was the Argentum Astrum, and used the first 3 degrees of the Golden Dawn Cipher Manuscripts rituals in place of those in the fraternal Blue Lodge degrees of contemporary Freemasonry. The inner order of the OTO was the upper Golden Dawn degrees, and those who had been initiated into the degrees of this level were allowed to know the secret that their entire group was being guided and controlled through the Bavarian Illuminati. Thus there was an outer head above the outer order co-Masonic degrees, and an inner head above the inner order Illuminist degrees, which Crowley proclaimed himself to occupy, called the Ipsissimus degree. All of this served the will of the conspirators quite well, considering they had orchestrated this whole chain of events, and wholly controlled Crowley and his choices, without ever needing to make their true personages known, even to him. The conspirators were overseeing the restructuring of the whole network of Jacobin Freemasonry via the Golden Dawn into the OTO, and had planted the first seeds of conspiracy-controlled Illuminism in the USA with Skull and Bones. At the same time, they began developing the Bavarian Illuminati into a New Age, religious-based political movement in Germany, meant to reconquer all of Europe for the conspiracy. The New Age religious movement was based on German theosophical concepts and was called the Thule Society, or the Order of the Black Sun. The political party that was eventually reconstituted from this original esoteric study group was called NASDAP, the National German Workers' Party, or the National Socialists, and history remembers them now as the Nazis. We consider it today a good goal for the USA to have defeated the German Nazis in World War II, because we see it as a political victory for democracy over the concept of a state tyranny. However, what few realize is that this war was only fought by we the people, but was orchestrated, fomented, and commanded on both sides by the conspiracy. The Skull and Bones secret society Yale College campus fraternity had already grown extremely influential and had produced several men already who had entered politics and gone on to hold high offices in U.S. democracy, even while totally committed to not only loyalty to the Bavarian Illuminati's goals expressed as the Protocols, but also to secretly funding Adolf Hitler's Third Reich under the German Nazis. These men were war criminals and national traitors guilty of treason, but despite including many subsequent presidents of the USA, their names are inconsequential footnotes beside the goals of those hidden conspirators who truly ruled the world at that time. Thus, we can say they were the only true winners of World War II, and their ideals, as expressed by Aleister Crowley, their modern-era mouthpiece, have utterly usurped the real goals of the Gnostic Christians and the Hermetic Templar Rosicrucian Freemason Jacobins. The losers of the last aeon have included the words and message of the true historical person of Jesus, which were lost at the time of Constantine to the Catholic message of the crucifixion, superseding the symbol of the Ichthus fish with the symbol of the Christian cross. The Templars were the next group to lose, betrayed by the Roman Catholic Pope of the Christian Church for revealing the true Gnostic doctrine of Jesus' own Christianity. The Hermetic Templar Rosicrucianism of Dr. John Dee has also been diluted in meaning and relevance by the Golden Dawn Cipher documents, reforming his cult to a new degree system and a New Age religion designed by Aleister Crowley. The original Perfectibilist order of Dr. Adam Weishaupt, which began as a correspondence course participated in by the greatest intellects of his day, was destroyed in its purge from Bavaria and reshaped into a tool of evil. The penultimate losers to the conspiracy over the last aeon are the free and accepted Masons, whose anti-papist origins in Jacobin secret societies has resulted in somehow implicating them in the originally Jesuit conspiracy of the Illuminati to overthrow all democratic governments and replace Christianity with Satanism. The final and biggest losers over the last aeon to the evil plotting of the Triumvirate Conspiracy of Assassins have been the American people, who for the entire 20th century were being bred, trained, and paid to serve the will of these secret elites. These elites have gained their authority by purchasing the buying power of privately owned banks. They can loan any sum beyond their own savings and charge limitless interest rates on this loan. Thus, the Bavarian perfectibilists began as intellectuals and Freemasons, but by the time they were purged as the Illuminati, they had already acquired control of the financial institutions of Europe and formed the first privately owned national banks. The skull and bones frat graduates of Yale came to occupy most of the offices of highest authority in the U.S. democracy by the turn of the 20th century, and assumed a massive level of control over the military might of the USA by the era of World War I. Following World War I, the United States Congress was forced to adopt a privately owned central bank as the sole no-bid contractor to the national democratic government, and this bank proceeded to crash the U.S. stock market and bring about the Great Depression that would lead America toward further economic dependence. Both world wars were fought to spread the reach and strength of the concept of central banks, and by the end of the First World War, during the ratification of the Treaty of Versailles that would financially bankrupt Germany and allow the Nazis to usher in World War II, the members of the First Federal Reserve Board of the U.S. partnered with their European counterparts to form the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR. As their influence expanded across Asia as well, by the 1940s, the conspiracy expanded its Round Table think tank's membership to include Asian nation representatives, and the result was the formation of the Trilateral Commission. Other organizations, such as the media and political organizing Bilderberg Group, below the CFR, and the above top secret level alien cover-up group called Majestic 12, below the Trilateral Commission, are so confidential they do not even have emblems. All the living members of these round table think tank occult political groups worship together annually at a resort called the Bohemian Grove Camp, where they practice ritual human sacrifice to a giant statue of an owl symbolizing Malak. This entire schema of groups outside the U.S. democratically elected government comprise what is today considered the shadow government that is really running the world, the conspiracy responsible for staging all world events of any consequence on all scopes of scale. Following the neocon coup d'etat during the staged recount of the 2000 elections for U.S. president, when the grandson of a Nazi sympathizer, son of a skull and bonesman, George W. Bush, was appointed to a democratically elected position by the U.S. Supreme Court, despite not having been elected by democratic votes, the shadow government became the de facto rulers of the USA. It is worth a brief examination of how these occult round table groups have assumed power over the democracy of the USA, since they represent the globalist agenda of the international conspiracy to destroy democracy and all national sovereignty and replace them with a single global king. The shadow government conspiracy we know of as ruling behind the scenes today was not always believed to be the natural result of an inherent and exploitable flaw in U.S. constitutional concepts of American democracy as it is seen as today. Originally, U.S. constitutional American democracy was a working concept that had no need of a central bank nor any form of direct taxation, such as income tax, to fund its public works projects. Smaller government meant a larger private sector, and eventually corporations began to outlast their government contracts. to police the American people from interstate commerce crimes such as corporate price fixing, tax evasion, and criminal racketeering, the U.S. created the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, during Prohibition to bust up rum-running rings run by low-level thugs like mafia gangsters. The logo of the FBI was the shield of the Justice Department. Following World War II, many of the Nazi funders and skull and bones men who owned the U.S. Federal Reserve Central Bank founded the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, to spy on the enemies of America in foreign countries, namely the Soviet Russians who came to power following the Rockefeller funding of the Red Revolution under Vladimir Lenin. In the logo of the CIA, an eagle raises its head from behind a shield that bears a Red Cross star on a white field. The next wing of the national intelligence community formed following the CIA was the National Security Agency, the NSA, whose main task was deciphering encoded enemy communications during the Cold War between the USA and Soviet Union. The NSA logo shows the eagle holding a key behind the U.S. flag on a shield. The CIA and NSA are governmental departments in the U.S. intelligence community that are equivalent in status and rank system in the private sector to the armed personnel of the U.S. military, and all of these answer to the orders handed down to them from the U.S. Department of Defense, or DoD, operated out of the Pentagon building in Washington, D.C. The seal of the DoD depicts the American flag-shielded eagle in flight, holding 3 arrows to symbolize the weapons of war coming in the form of death from above. The intelligence community and armed services under the DoD and the Pentagon in turn answer to the Commander-in-Chief of the entire U.S. government, the democratically elected President of the USA. The seal of the Executive Office of the U.S. is almost identical to the front of the Great Seal of the U.S. and shows the eagle aloft bearing a banner in its beak reading E pluribus unum, meaning one for all, and holding in its talons a bundle of arrows in one and a bundle of olive branches in the other. However, since 9/11/2001, the neocons who assumed authority over the democracy of the USA established a concept called continuity of government, or COG, that allows a redundant location for all essential government personnel in a deep underground base in the event of a nuclear war. The logo of the group of security personnel manning these bases and their satellite concentration camps, the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, shows the presidential eagle aloft, however replaces the flag of the USA on the shield in front of the eagle, with symbols of land, sea, and air, signifying global U.S. military dominance. The neocons adopted a variation of the U.S. flag as their logo, but enacted the legislation of warrantless wiretapping, kidnapping to and torture at secret death camps of suspected terrorists who are not only citizens of foreign nations, but include also citizens of America as well. The neocons of the W. Bush administration are not loyal to the U.S. Constitution of American democracy they took their oaths of office to protect, and do not value democratic ideals, but instead value the ideals expressed in the protocols and swear allegiance in secret at Bohemian Grove to the conspiracy of assassins. The neocon shadow government mechanism remains attached to the U.S. constitutional American democratic government in the form of these alphabet soup agencies, even now in 2011 AD. However, there remains hope we, the people, can overthrow this mechanism through democracy and or a peaceful uprising. The conspirators' worst fear is exposure for their crimes against humanity, and for their collaboration with their alleged enemies in behind-the-scenes backroom shady deals to defraud the people and render them into slaves under a one-world king. The conspirators must remain in hiding, operating their key players from behind the scenes for their conspiracy to be successful. In order to do this, they apply Hegelian dialectics to pit one side of any issue against the other, and get brother to kill brother in a disagreement they foment between them over an ideal both share. The CFR was founded by the same people who funded the Bolshevik communists in Russia. By using the goal of world peace as a bait, the CFR was able to form the world's first League of Nations, which was meant to form a multinational army to enforce the will of its diplomatic representatives to protect the world from future uprisings by mad tyrants. The League of Nations was so odious a concept, the U.S. Congress never ratified U.S. membership in it, and insofar as it professed to offer global peace, it failed to prevent the Great Depression or the consequences thereof in the form of World War II. By the beginning of World War II, the Federal Reserve Central Bank of the USA had grown large enough to privately fund both sides of the war, and thus they paid for the weapons of both the Allies and the Axis powers, and so both went into debt to them. The Nazis arose in Germany and sought to conquer and unify Europe into a New Age occult version of the old Holy Roman Empire of Catholic Christendom. The result of their attempt at such and defeat at the hands of the USA and its allies was the creation of the nation of Israel by reallocation of land assets conquered by the Axis powers tied to Germany, then reconquered by U.S. and Allied forces in the Middle East, annexing nearly all of Palestine, including the Holy Lands around Jerusalem. Just as the theft of the Holy Land from the indigenous Muslim Arabs when Palestine was repopulated as Israel was meant to and did accomplish the replacement of the German Third Reich with an equally powerful Nazi superstate centered in the Middle East, so too did World War II end by replacing the League of Nations with the United Nations, wherein the U.S. has a permanent seat on the 5-member Security Council. The United Nations is to its member nation states what Aleister Crowley's OTO Bund was to all the Jacobin Freemasonic lodges, networking them together under the Illuminati and then reshaping their goals to match those of the Illuminati protocols. It is a sham attempt toward global governance by a single dictator, meant to prove by false flag attack that democracy inevitably fails. It is quite lucky for those of us who, like you and I are now, are researching conspiracy theories, that those in the true and real conspiracy are such revolting, idiotic dolts. All the flags they have invented have been only white or yellow and blue. Consider the League of Nations flag, showing a white pentagram inside a blue pentagram inside a blue outlined pentagon on a blank white field. The pentagram, as we established during the discussion on the alchemical Rosicrucians, symbolizes humanity as our 2 legs, 2 arms, and head. One iteration up the number of stellations from the pentagram on the flag of the League of Nations is the hexagram on the flag of the nation of Israel, shown here also as blue on white, and symbolizing the Star of David, which itself was meant to signify the dimensions of the ark used as the foundation for the architectural designs for the first temple constructed by King Solomon. The logo of Nato, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which provides the Army of Europe when called upon by the UN, just as the Pentagon controls the U.S. Army, shows a white, target-shaped star of 4 cardinal compass points on a blue field. The logo of the European Union, the EU, shows a circle of 12 pentagram stars in yellow on a field of blue. The EU has its own currency and has bloodlessly unified most of Europe over the last 50 years, just as the American Revolutionary War unified the British colonies into the United States some 200 years before. Finally, the logo of the United Nations, the UN, is a white globe seen from above the North Pole, surrounded by twin white olive branches on a blue field. The use of the color blue is meant to symbolize world peace throughout all these flags, and all these organizations were started by cowardly, conspiratorial central bank owners. We might look for a suitable name for the conspirators who rule from behind the scenes today, and who shape and control all events of consequence on the world stage, and settle for Nazis, since that is the name of the philosophy they all, from the German Illuminati to the U.S. neocons today, worship and adhere to. However, it is more important to remember that these mere Nazi religion idiots now wield the same sum of power always sought after by the secret conspirators and the assassins who killed Julius Caesar and Jesus Christ, no less so than Russian Tsar Nicholas Romanov and U.S. President John Kennedy. The same mindset possessed the assassin senators who killed Julius Caesar as those men now in power who seek to lop the head off of anyone who sticks their neck up above the poverty line of lowest possible personal power. The same secret order of men that they formed then exists now, and its members remain privy to all the plans behind politics and religion that comprise all significant events on the world stage today. We call them simply the conspiracy.